Okay, I think it's the Trojan theme and the vibrant and accessible nature of the mosaic that has captured the imagination. And I think it's thankfully brought some much needed colour to a very difficult winter. And of course, this is a very exciting time for everyone involved. And now, of course, Rutland has got the sea dragon as well. So it's a big news for a small county anyway. Now, archaeology as a profession relies on public interest. We need people to appreciate and value what we do. So the site's been a boon to the university. It's helped to showcase the type of projects that staff are involved in, and therefore how the institution is contributing to society. And with any luck, it's attracting future archaeologists to the profession and also encouraging members of the public to become actively involved with their local heritage, sort of helping to promote a sense of place, really. But it's still very early days following the discovery of the site, and we've only just begun to explore the evidence. Most of you will have seen photographs of the mosaic on the news, but you may not have quite realised the scale and complexity of the site. So this evening, I'm going to try and put the mosaic into some kind of context for you. So first, I'm going to outline the background to the project, and then I'll discuss the evidence so far and what we know about the layout of the site. Then we'll have a closer look at the mosaic itself, and finally we'll consider what we know about the later history of the site. Now, I just want to point out at this stage that this is very, very much a team effort. So what I'm going to say, it's not just my thoughts, it's drawn from discussions with many excavators and scholars, most particularly David Neal, who's an expert on mosaics as well as an excellent artist, and people from the university such as Jeremy Taylor, John Thomas, Jane Massilia, and also people like Pete Liddell as well, and many, many other experts who have been in touch to generously share their thoughts and knowledge. So let's move on. Okay. Oh, I shall attempt to move on. There we go. So this just shows you some of the publicity that the site has experienced. And if we then head back to the beginning, let's go back to 2020. So Jim Irvin is the man that discovered the site, and his father, Brian Naylor, farms the land where the villa was found. Now, during lockdown, Jim was walking around in the field and discovered some pottery. He was pretty intrigued by it and went on Google Earth when he noticed some crop marks suggesting that there was a building in the field. Well, he was so interested that he went back with a shovel and his family one hot August afternoon and actually uncovered part of the mosaic showing figures. So he reported this find to the museum, and immediately the potential importance of the discovery was realised. Historic England got involved, and they funded a small excavation of the site to record what had been found and assess its quality, its preservation and its archaeological potential. Now, my first encounter with the mosaic was at that point when I was lucky enough to be chosen to lead the excavation to record the exposed archaeology and then to securely backfill the mosaic to protect it. Now, it's pretty fair to say that I'd never seen anything like this before. In fact, I was strongly reminded of encountering elaborate mosaics on holidays in places like Cyprus and Turkey. I certainly didn't expect to see it in a field in Rutland. Now, the small team, it was a very small team last year, and this included Pete Liddell and Debbie Frierson, and David Neal came to draw and paint the visible part of the mosaic. However, we had to keep our knowledge of the existence and location of the discovery a strict secret, and this was a state of affairs that had to continue until the site could be scheduled to give it legal protection, which took place last autumn. Now, to gain information for the scheduling, we needed to find out more about the context of the mosaic. So it's obvious that it was part of a wider complex of rooms and buildings, and a geophysical survey was commissioned from Sumo, who are a company that specialise in these things, and this explored the whole field. Now, the techniques worked really well. What you're seeing now in front of you is the magnetometry plot, and you can see how well features are standing out here. Now, magnetometry is a well-used and rapid geophysical technique that detects and maps variations in magnetic response compared with background response. But the areas of variation are known as magnetic anomalies, and they can have many causes, but they can indicate buried archaeological features, and that's what we are seeing in this case. Anomalies were detected across the area, and these broadly consist of sort of linear responses, which largely represent ditches, and also areas of increased and decreased magnetic response, which indicate structures and associated settlement features. So we've got these two ditch anomalies. So hopefully you can see my cursor moving here, which shows two ditches curving round and sort of echoing the edge of the high ground above a river. But one of the most striking features are indicated by these responses here, these very, very clear linears, which look like they are bordering a complex of buildings here, represented by these sort of, well, in this case, slightly blobby, but as you'll see, once we get to the next geophysical survey, these are really going to clarify. So what's notable is that the main areas of enhanced magnetic responses were located on the higher ground. So we're not seeing so many further down here, but that could be to do with alluvial or colluvial cover as well. And I think some of these responses that we're seeing at the bottom here is probably very much what that is. You'll notice I've got some little ditches that are drawn around here. That's because we've actually explored the peripheral areas of the site. So we've had a look at some of those features. And what we found was that there were lots of different backfills in these features. They were recut several times, suggesting they'd been around for quite a long time and perhaps silted up or been deliberately backfilled and had to be recut again. Now, some of them contained hardly any pottery or bone, but some of them were very, very full of it, and also full of lots of building rubble. And intriguingly, in one of our early trenches, we also found a human burial. So that was sort of positioned between a couple of the ditches there. And yeah, certainly very interesting to find that on the edge of the site. Now, a second type of geophysical survey was carried out over areas of particular interest on the higher ground. And this was ground penetrating radar. And you can see the plot of that here. So that's a technique that works by emitting a pulse into the ground and recording the reflections that result from objects under the surface. It works particularly well, as you can see here, on structures and solid objects, but perhaps less well on things like ditches. So you can see these are our boundary ditches that were really obvious in the magnetometry, but are actually a lot less obvious here on this plot. But what we have got by, you know, great compensation, really, we've got these wonderful detailed building outlines that we can see here. So what we're going to do now is explore some of these features. We're only going to be able to go through them deeply because not very, sorry, let's try that one again. We're not going to be able to delve into these very deeply. We're really only going to have to look at them quite in quite sort of a simple way, really. But I think that it will sort of give you an idea of the range of buildings that we've got on this site. So let's start to look at some of those now. This is the first one, and as you can see, this is incredibly complex. So in this main building, it's actually possible to identify individual rooms and corridors, and it's particularly complex at this southern end. The northern end here is actually where the mosaic is located. And we also have this rather strange annex at the top here, and also another one around there at the bottom. So there's an awful lot going on here. We can see lots of circular structures as well. I mean, these could be wells, they could be stone roundhouses, they could be shrines. We could even have evidence for a mausoleum or something, which is certainly not unknown on these type of sites. Moving on, we've got these two buildings here, which are set at right angles to each other. So it certainly looks like these are likely to be contemporary, because the way they are set out suggests that they've been sort of deliberately positioned in relation to each other, that they certainly are likely to have existed at the same time. Now, they do seem to have a slightly different character. In this one here, we can see a lot more rooms. There's sort of quite a lot more going on inside that building. And what's interesting about it as well is that it seems to be positioned almost in the middle of the enclosure ditches. I mean, that has sort of excited some speculation that this could actually even be an original villa, sort of in the centre of the enclosure, and perhaps, the one with the mosaic is actually later. I mean, this is something we can't really solve without excavation, but it's certainly an interesting theory. This other structure, you see further down here, that could be something agricultural. It may be something like a granary. Again, the sort of structure that we'd expect to find on this sort of estate. Let's move on and have a look at some of the others. We've got this rather lovely, rather curious little structure down here. So a quite irregularly shaped building, aligned broadly east-west. Probably a detached bathhouse at the western edge of the settlement. So that kind of cruciform shape has been seen in bathhouses elsewhere. And then we've got buildings right down the slope as well. So this is below the break of slope, below the villa. And interestingly, the reflections are less clear than they are on the higher ground. So it looks like we have got some kind of alluvial cover there. Of course, it's also located close to a water supply. So it might well be that, again, we're looking at perhaps the kind of integrated building which has both agricultural and residential functions, may even have some kind of a bathhouse in it. So let's have a look at this one. Very similar sort of building to the previous one. Again, we're seeing that sort of slightly fuzzy quality that might be to do with the cover over the top of the structure, but it's very similar in dimensions, its location on the slope as the previous building. And again, we're looking at something that's probably about 27 by about, I think about 10 meters, that one. And there do seem to be several structures inside this. So we've really got a kind of hugely complex range of buildings. Now, this next one that we're going to look at is rather interesting. So this is actually represented by some rows of post pits. And what it looks like we've got here is another aisled building or a barn, of which only the substantial aisle post survived. The intriguing thing about this one is that it's on a slightly different alignment, suggesting that it perhaps belongs to a different phase of activity. So it could be Roman. Roman aisled buildings are pretty common, but it might belong to just an either earlier or later Roman phase. It could potentially even be Saxon. And this question is really something that's only going to be resolved by excavation. So in summary, it looks like we have the full range of buildings that we might expect at a villa site. Presumably these have got different functions, they're unlikely all to be contemporary. They do, looking at them, suggest that we've got a settlement that's really quite long-lived and maybe has changed in status over that time. The number of known villas in East Leicestershire, Rutland and North Northamptonshire is slowly growing, and a quick search reveals a wealth of Roman settlement and other remains in the area. But the relatively undisturbed state of this complex offers huge research potential for the future. Few of the other known villas are recent discoveries, so they were either found or investigated in antiquity or in the early 20th century. Excavation, therefore, has been rather patchy and often took place in the middle years of the 20th century when techniques were not quite so well developed. So things like environmental archaeology, for example, would not have been considered so important. And also, some of these sites no longer exist. And by contrast, this new villa estate seems to be largely intact and is therefore of national and regional significance. And this is really the reason why archaeologists are just so excited about this place. I mean, to illustrate, a study has shown that of known villa sites in the country, we know really hardly anything about the layout beyond the main villa building. And it's actually only for about 25% of cases where we actually know a bit more about what's going on around it. So it's resulted in incomplete plans, and we haven't always got good understanding of their chronologies, or good finds assemblages, or good environmental evidence. So carefully targeted research is going to provide wide information, on a different range of things like the social, economic and ritual activity across the site. So it really is very exciting for us. Moving on then, after the 2020 investigations, we knew that we really did need to go back to the site, but it was a case of not only defining our research objectives, but also securing funding. Now, the pandemic had effectively interrupted excavation opportunities in 2020, and there was a whole cohort of archaeology students at the University of Leicester who had missed out on an essential component of their course, and they needed to do a second batch of fieldwork in 2021. So this was actually going to be our route back to the site. There was a long period of discussion between ULAS and the School of Archaeology and Ancient History, also with Historic England, with Leicestershire and Rutland county councils, and various external specialists as well. But finally, a trench plan and methodology for the work was agreed, and the work took place in September last year, September 2021. Now, as exciting as it all sounded, I knew it would be intense, especially as John Thomas, the project manager, happened to mention that he had asked if Digging for Britain would like to come along too. We chose 3 areas to look at during the season of work. The first one is the mosaic trench, and I'm not sure if you can all actually read those objectives here, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to summarise them for you. So, there was really compelling artistic and archaeological reasons to expose the mosaic in its entirety so that it could be studied and understood as fully as possible. And we also needed to have a look around the mosaic to see how the room fitted into the northern part of the villa, and what other types of rooms were around it. But it was particularly important to record the later archaeology of the villa site and what led to it being forgotten under a field. Quite often with earlier excavations on villas, people would go straight for the structural information. They'd head for those walls and those floors, and sometimes that later archaeology, the more ephemeral stuff that you find higher up, sometimes that was lost. So this was really a key aim for us. Then we had a look at the northern annex, and we really wanted to make sense of this part of the building because it appeared slightly separate to the main villa house. So what did this part look like? What was its function? And how did it relate to the ditch to its east? And finally, the circular building particularly intrigued us because it had a different form to the other parts of the site. We hoped to find out if it was of a different date, perhaps, possibly earlier than the villa building. Was it a domestic or agricultural building, or could we even have a shrine or temple? There were certainly lots of possibilities there. And it's this trench that we're going to have a look at in more detail first. So it's probably reasonable to say that we didn't manage to get quite as far with this trench as we might have liked in the time available, because resources ended up being prioritised elsewhere. But despite that, we did manage to characterise the archaeology, and we identified at least 2 phases of activity. The circular structure had stone foundations and a diameter of 8.8 metres, which is a pretty good size for a roundhouse. Removal of part of the rubble from the inside revealed a packed earth floor and a few areas of scorching. And there were also hints of internal features as well, such as, I think it's the bottom left picture. We've actually got a sort of wedge-shaped stone structure, which is next to a burnt area inside the circular structure. And there were also 2 linear walls to the north, which were added later, so during a remodelling of the circular building. We know this because they butter up to it rather than being keyed in, and the curving wall section between them was pretty ill-defined, quite rubbly. So it seemed that that was actually demolished when the walls were added to sort of enlarge the structure to the north. So what else did we find in this trench? Well, we actually found that the trench was very rich in finds. So there were lots of pottery, lots of bones recovered from this area, suggesting that occupational activities were taking place. And as you'll see later on in this presentation, this was quite unusual compared with the rest of the site, where we weren't getting an awful lot of this domestic detritus. Now, a lot of it was recovered from a series of enclosure ditches to the west of the trench, which had been recut multiple times, suggesting longevity, and which may provide us with valuable evidence for the chronology of the site. Preliminary pottery dates do suggest a date of the 3rd century AD, so although this is slightly earlier than the later 3rd to 4th century suggested in the other trenches, it still relates to the later part of the Roman period. So we didn't really quite get what we were hoping for there. But you know, as I said before, it's still early days, and we still have an awful lot more of the pottery to look at. We found dumps of sort of ashy material identified outside the building, and we took soil samples both inside and outside the structures, and early results indicate that those are rich in cereal grains, including spelt. So again, we've got, you know, these agricultural activities taking place, and certainly the evidence so far is pointing to an agricultural character rather than anything that is funerary or to do with religious activities. So at the very least, we've been able to actually rule out a couple of possible interpretations. We're going to head east now and look at the northern annex to the main villa building. So that's what we can see here. Now, the walls identified largely reflect what was seen in the GPR survey. So we're looking at the northeast corner of the building. The width between the two main walls seems to be very suitable for a sort of corridor, but the space was later subdivided, creating some quite small little areas. We know that this was a later thing because, again, the walls butted up to the main walls rather than being keyed in, so were almost certainly added later. Intriguingly, no tessellated or mortar floors were identified in the excavated slots, and there was very little wall plaster, suggesting that this building was quite sparsely decorated. Certainly doesn't seem to have the rich character of the mosaic trench next door. And our observations also indicate that there were few domestic finds, such as pottery or bone, except in the ditch fill. So whatever this structure was, whether it could possibly be even slave or servant quarters, possibly storage, or simply unfinished, it lacked the luxury elements of the main villa. We discovered some quite interesting things regarding the ditch to the east. So the evidence shows that this originally predated the building and was partially backfilled around the time that the building was constructed, and then later recut to sort of reopen that channel. Let's have a look at the little square structure now to the north of this annex. So this is a rather curious thing. It's about 3.5 meters across. As you can see, we kind of half sectioned it. So we just looked at the eastern half of it and left the other part unexcavated. So the wall was one continuous build. It was originally freestanding, but a very short stretch of infill walling later linked it to the rest of the annex. Once again, we had no signs of wall plaster or floors, but very curiously, an infant burial was located outside the structure in the main made ground. This burial was lined north-south and was roughly halfway along the wall. Something to realise about this was that we didn't see a grave cut originally. With this, the infant was almost discovered by accident because we were putting a slot in over the top of the wall and then stumbled on these very tiny bones. So the level that the infant's buried was not fully exposed, and therefore there is a possibility that there's more down there. We don't know, but certainly we have got at least this one. Infant burials are certainly not uncommon in Roman domestic settings. There's a number of theories about why this might be the case, from infanticide to foundation deposits, or even trying to keep the infant close. But at this point, it is really no more than speculation. We just know that we did find this, these tiny bones. We're going to have a look at the mosaic trench now, and have a look at the architecture of the apse to start with. So this is located at the north end of the villa building. The mosaic room is probably the triclinium, a sort of dining room, which is named for the 3 couches which traditionally occupied the apsidal end. The apse so could sort of be viewed really as a kind of seat of power, and there's certainly room in our apse for seating, and the plain floor as well, undecorated, so we're not seeing any figures in the apse there, and that certainly does imply that this end was used for furniture. If we accept that the villa was likely to have faced south, then this room is at the back of the building, so it's presumably not a room that could be reached without going through other rooms first, a sort of end reception room really. And certainly what we have seen is that it's rather elaborately decorated. The apse itself is polygonal rather than semicircular, and what we also found were the stone plinths. I've put some photographs of these on the slide, and these were showing at each corner of the apse, probably indicating roof supports, perhaps for an elaborate or vaulted roof over the top of the apse. So really, that could be something quite special, but unfortunately we haven't found a lot of other architectural fragments associated with this, which again is quite an intriguing thing. Now, most of the roof must have been tiled in the local Collie Western slate, because we found large quantities of it in the rubble. These tended to be your traditional sort of diamond-shaped slates, very, very Roman, and many had nail holes, and sometimes we'd actually still got the iron nail there, intact. But there were also lesser quantities of ceramic tiles, tegula and imbrex, which suggests that the roof was not made of a single material. The next slide, I've actually taken some pictures here to show you, really give you a sense of what this triclinium might have looked like. So as you can see, these are from reconstructions of lulling stones outside or dining room. So you can see in this model here, you've got, they haven't got a polygonal apse, theirs is semicircular, but it's still that same sort of arrangement. So you're sort of seeing this, you have to get through a load of other rooms to actually get to it. And then when you do get there, there's a sort of special area for people to sit in. The difference with ours compared with the lulling stone one is we haven't got evidence for any divider between the apse itself and the part of the room, to the south. But even so, I think you probably do get a sense of what this might have been like, sort of a real kind of seat of power up there in the apse, looking out over a rather fancy mosaic. Let's have a quick look at what we're seeing in the areas around the mosaic room then. So we wanted to look at those immediate surroundings, and we identified more tessellated pavements on the east and the south side. The example on the east was patterned. Now, our mosaic expert David Neal thinks it's very likely that this pattern would have been repeated across the room. The floor on the south, however, was plain, it was grey and it was undecorated. And although we haven't exposed vast amounts of that, it would have to be a very wide border for there to actually be, a scene in the middle of there. So perhaps something a little bit more functional there. And there are also hints that there were several phases of activity around the mosaic room. So possibly an earlier wall. I'm just going to point at that with my cursor there. There was some sort of slightly different things about the way that was built, and sort of I did wonder, though I'm not able to prove it, I did wonder if originally that actually came straight across, and perhaps the mosaic room was a sort of later addition. And another thing which was very intriguing was that the mosaic itself was slumped through the middle, so suggesting that it could well have been built over an earlier feature, you know, perhaps a ditch or something that had been backfilled and then had later caused it to subside. We didn't find much pottery in this room either, but the dates that we have so far suggests late 3rd to 4th century, certainly looking at the sort of very last period of Roman occupation. A rather interesting thing was found on the west side of the mosaic, and this was under a large rubble-filled area. So it contained some fragments of box flue and also pieces of a broken up mosaic which had been laid on a thick bed of mortar and therefore presumably sat above a hypocaust system. So we found a stone flue, and as you can see, the stones of the channel were scorched pink, and it was also partly filled with this very sooted, ashy residue just at the bottom there, which I think the samples so far show was pretty much just composed of charcoal. So really quite a, you know, really is kind of saying that this is a hypocaust rather than perhaps something that had been inserted later, like perhaps a corn dryer or something like that. Now, there was too much rubble to remove by hand, so at the very end of the excavation, we removed some of it by machine. And then we found that these in situ blocks of masonry, which appeared to have been topped with stone slabs. And it may well be that these are actually part of a channeled hypocaust. So these were probably beneath a mosaic floor, beneath the one that we found broken up, I think, in the rubble. And there's likely to be more of it down there as well. But you know, certainly there's been quite sort of heavy robbing in this area, which we will have a little look at a bit later on. And there's still plenty of questions that it would be nice to resolve. So we don't really know when this area was destroyed and backfilled. We don't also know if this room is contemporary or earlier than the mosaic room, because it does suggest that this room was heated, but not the mosaic room. Again, possibly hinting that the mosaic room may be a later insertion. So hopefully you now have a sense of the context of the mosaic. And I think it's time that we actually looked at that itself in later detail. This was certainly the most anticipated part of the project. So the overall size of the mosaic, once we'd exposed it, was about 11 by about 7 meters. And it was completely revealed and recorded. Sadly, there is quite a lot of damage and scorching in a number of places, but it was still possible to gain a full sense of the decorative scheme and also allow those narrative panels to be understood. So it's quite a rare mosaic in that it actually tells us a story. As I mentioned earlier, the apse itself was plain, and apart from a quite a curious maybe a repair or something here, where we've actually got a few blocks of different coloured tesserae, but you know, really the whole way that the tesserae were laid in the apse were kind of a bit more haphazard compared with the careful work that we will be looking at with the figured part of the mosaic. I think the whole thing is carefully and neatly composed, and certainly to my view, the detail is not overdone. It's not really overwhelming. Now, the mosaic pavement is set in a surround of large grey tesserae and is framed by 4-strand guilloche, which is a sort of braided pattern that you see around the outside. And then it's divided into 3 rectangular panels by lengths of simple guilloche. And a panel with a guilloche mat, so that's, I think, what you can just see it's sort of robbed away a bit round there, but that would be sort of almost pure guilloche. It's known as guilloche mat, and that separates the apse from the figurative part. Each panel tells a story, and that story is of the siege of Troy, and it's based on Homer's Iliad, written about 800 BCE. Now, this is the first mosaic in Roman Britain to depict scenes from the Trojan War, and here the story alluded to is the battle between the Greek, well, sort of superhero really, Achilles, with Hector, Prince of Troy. And the background to this episode is that Patroclus, who was Achilles' close friend and ally, had gone into battle wearing Achilles' armour and was killed by Hector. And Achilles is absolutely grief-stricken and absolutely furiously enraged as well, and he's out for revenge. Now, he was a very popular figure to depict on mosaics, and he does actually appear on several in Roman Britain. For example, the episode of Achilles disguised as a woman on Skyros appears at Keynsham, Somerset, and I think also Rudge in Wiltshire. So Achilles himself is not unknown, but this particular story certainly is. Let's have a look at the first panel. So what we've got here is a really exciting scene. We've got two figures armed with spears and carrying shields who are driving two-horse chariots towards each other at great speed. The horses of the chariot to the right are both light-coloured, with red harnesses, bridles and reins, and are smaller than the horses confronting them. Whether this is intentional or perhaps something that, perhaps a sort of slight mistake in the mosaic is unsure. I mean, I like to think it's because the mosaicists are sort of highlighting the kind of godlike status of Achilles, but that is just an opinion. Now, one of the horses is light and the other is dark on the right hand side, and their harnesses are much more elaborate, and there are curved lines which we thought originally might represent mud thrown up to indicate speed, which sort of appear under the hooves. But I actually have it on very good authority now that these in other mosaics are considered to be shadows. That's how they depict shadows in mosaics. So that's really rather interesting, and that's something that came up through feedback from a previous talk. So this panel represents the duel between Hector and Achilles, which is normally described as being on foot rather than from chariots. And those light and dark horses are likely to belong to Achilles because these are the immortal horses Xanthus and Peleus, who were a wedding gift to Achilles' parents from Poseidon. Yeah, I mean, it certainly gets complicated. So Achilles on the left is a large, bold and dramatic figure. He's clearly got the upper hand, I think, there. And it looks like Hector is slightly compressed into the right side of the panel and has his back to the viewer. He holds a shield in his left hand and spear or javelin in his right, and he's wearing a tunic. Let's have a closer look at a couple of the details. There we go. So there we have a closer look at Achilles sort of staring ferociously. And then we've got the horses. So we've got the immortal horses there facing our presumably not very immortal horses of Hector. And now it's time to move on to the second panel. Sadly, the battle's over here, but it's still an intensely dramatic scene. So what we have is a figure driving a chariot. So that's presumably the victorious Achilles driving his chariot there. And as you can see, he is dragging the body of Hector, whose eyes are closed in death, and who has these lines of red tesserae there that seem to be depicting wounds or abrasions on the body. And then we have presumably one of Achilles' supporters there. He's almost certainly will have a name. Could be Diomedes, could be Patroclus, who knows, sort of ghost Patroclus, I don't know, but certainly there will be people who will know exactly who this figure is. So there's well, whoever he is, he's pretty pleased that Achilles has won. And here we have King Priam, and there's a lot of very sort of poignant details about this figure, really. He's noticed that he's got no shoes on there because he's basically run out from Troy. He's trying to stop Achilles from, you know, from just dragging the body of his son around, and he wants to be able to bury him with honour. We know he's a Trojan, partly because he's wearing this Phrygian cap there, and he's, you know, wearing quite a distinctive robe as well. Now, these little creatures here are rather intriguing. They are little sea monsters. So they've got sort of three-pronged red tails, and unfortunately you can only see the face of one of them there. I think I've put a close-up of that, which we'll have a look at in just a moment. And they may represent the sort of coastal location of Troy, or perhaps they're referring to the gift of the horses from Poseidon. Either way, they're sort of really giving us a kind of, you know, sort of bringing the closeness of the sea into this. So here's our horses again. You can see the wonderful details of them. And there's the detail of King Priam's head. And yes, this actually illustrates rather nicely the way we have the figures overlapping the panels, and that sort of really lends a kind of 3D effect to this, so that you've actually got your figures who are almost, you know, almost leaping out of the panels. They're sort of given more life by the fact that they're overlapping the border. And yes, there's a detail of poor Hector. And I don't know if you can see that one, it might just be hidden, but we've got our little sea monster there, which was pretty much everybody's favourite on site. Okay, let's move on then to the final panel, which is the uppermost one. Okay, so again, we've got Priam begging Achilles to release his son Hector's body. Now, in this version, it's agreed to match his weight with gold for the ransom. So we have this imposing figure at the centre with red leggings, sandals, and a purple tunic, who is holding scales. Hector's body, I think you can probably just about make that out there. So that's lying on one side of the scale, supported by 4 red suspension cords or rods, and a line of red tesserae might be the wounds inflicted by Achilles. The other side is being filled with gold vessels held by King Priam, who's dressed identically to the previous panel, except for the red shoes or boots. In the top right corner behind him, we have this rather strange field carrying figure here, who we did notice actually doesn't seem to have any legs. Quite curious, not quite sure why that is at all. Unfortunately, the left side of the panel is badly scorched. You can just about make out this figure here, who is possibly the figure that we saw in the previous panel. He could be Diomedes, who's kind of second Achilles in the Iliad. Achilles himself is quite hard to see, but once you notice his eyes and hair, it does become easier. So there's his eyes shining out at us, and that's his hair. So he's actually sat in the middle. We've got his leg coming down there. So let's have a closer look at some of these. So here we have the figure holding scales, and a closer look at our Trojans there on the right-hand side. Now, I did a little bit of work with the photogrammetry, really kind of trying to trace the lines that I could see in the scorched area. And I actually came up with this. So this is all based on what I could, not so much the colours which have been affected by scorching, but more to do with the way I could see that the tesserae have been laid. And really, it looks like we would have had quite a spectacular scene if this had all survived. Now, we've definitely got some, we've got spear here, we've got Achilles sat there and he's holding it. Not quite sure what he's sitting on. This is certainly one leg. He's got his knee bent here. We're not sure whether this could be armour behind him or whether that is actually another figure. So there's certainly some more that can come out of this, which is really quite exciting. Now, this sort of topic for a mosaic really kind of shows the long reach of these stories. So we have the same scene, which is shown on a very different stylistic mosaic from Villa Tellaro in Sicily. And yes, this again shows scales. I think you can just about see Hector's body down there, but you know, it's I say completely different style. But in these details, both mosaics diverge from the Iliad. So in the Iliad, Achilles vows that he's not going to return Hector's body, not even for his weight in gold. So where did these scales come from? Now, there was a 5th century playwright, Aeschylus, who mentions these in his now mostly lost play, The Phrygians. So he introduces the scales to balance the corpse against his weight in gold, presumably because this was a sort of dramatic thing that would look good on stage. But the story of the scales also occurs in something called the Excidium Troiae, which is a medieval manuscript, which was collected by Richard Rawlinson in the early 17th century, is now in the Bodleian Library. And that may have been based on an earlier Latin text. So whether the scene here is illustrating Aeschylus or is a postulated lost Latin version, or is even just retelling the story in a different way, it's all debatable, but it does show that whoever commissioned the mosaic was not only very rich, but also wanted to display their knowledge of the classics. These scenes could have been based on illustrations from a codex, and it has been speculated that this may even have been something that was owned by the villa owner. But there's really so much detail in this mosaic that we haven't even begun to discuss. So, things like the style of clothes and the hairstyles. So there's really going to be so much more that we're going to be able to understand. But I think it certainly does reflect the emphasis placed on classical education for wealthy Romans in this period, because we do see these mythological subjects in other mosaics too. And it also shows what's important to the owner, sort of a thrilling tale of heroes, combat, victory, defeat, grief, revenge, death. But there may also be moral lessons that the subject was intended to impart, things that perhaps it's hard for us to understand as we're not Romans and we haven't grown up in that context. So the final part of this talk is about what happened afterwards to the villa, the sort of the fate of the villa really. And this, I think, is just as interesting as what has gone before, perhaps even more so in a way. There's lots of evidence that the space was used differently in its later history. We've got areas of burning on top of the main floor, which suggest a sequence of halves. So starting in the southeast corner, where we have a rather neat little half, which has been built against the plasterwork and shows neat circular area of scorching. So that was, a rather nice little fireplace that was on the border of the mosaic and therefore has, presumably occurred when the room is still in use and the mosaic is still valued in some way. But we then find areas of intense scorching and heat damage across the mosaic. You can see from this illustration here, all of those purple areas, that's all your kind of scorching and your charcoal debris. So these indicate multiple halves or locations of burning activity and things that have come directly into contact with the floor itself. So they've changed the colour of those mosaic tiles. And we later then find that the floor is covered with a thick layer of silt, charcoal and decayed mortar. So it sort of really is kind of starting to, certainly take on a different use. The room is at some point filled with what appears to be sorted rubble. So we're not really seeing those larger building blocks. And we've also got at least one half within the rubble layer itself. And we don't really know how long this process took. We've also got fragments of quern found in the rubble. So things that you wouldn't really expect to find as building material, suggesting that the rubble that's in there perhaps, it has got mixed with other material. It doesn't necessarily, it's certainly not saying that the building collapsed, something like that. This has been a process of some kind. So it's difficult to decide exactly what's happening here, because we see things like halves which are part way up the rubble and disused areas, perhaps suggesting that this infilling took some time, and maybe even that the rubble was perhaps built up to use as a surface of some kind. It's certainly something that we will be looking into as our post-excavation goes on. We also see quite a lot of robbing and the destruction of the floor in that western part as well. So the diagram here shows that area of robbing, and you can see how that's kind of nibbled into the edge of the mosaic. And we found all these pieces of broken up mosaic on a thick bed of concrete, so the ones that were presumably sat above that hypocaust. And broken up bits of wall plaster as well. So we've got some rather lovely colours, but they tend to be small pieces. We're not really getting those big bits that suggest collapse. And then things get even more intriguing. What we have found is a grave on top of the rubble containing two burials flexed at the knee. One appears to be laying behind the other one. Now, these are centred within the apse, so it does certainly look as though the walls of the building were still visible at the time. It still has some significance. And we also found some disarticulated bones, which are presumably from disturbed burials, including that fragment of the skull that you can see in this picture here. We don't yet know the date of these, but it's really tempting to think that they might be Saxon. We know that Saxon graves in Roman sites are well known. A nearby example is Empingham Villa, which had Middle Saxon graves. So this is certainly going to be a focus for research as the project moves on. And it doesn't stop there. In the Northern Annex, we've also got a kind of funerary focus, where we've also got animal bones as well as human bones located in these rubble layers. So we've got this large dog, which was buried on top of the rubble within the square structure, and therefore post-dating the use of the building. We also had some human foot bones, which were presumably attached to the rest of the human, which extend into the southern bulk of the trench. So they were outside our area of excavation. And we've also got groups of animal bones, which we found in the rubble in the building. So again, the date is currently unknown for these, but what we'd really like to do is include them in a programme of C14 dating from the site. So pretty exciting stuff. Here's just a few photographs really, just to kind of illustrate the nature of the excavation and show the students working and hopefully show that there was a lot of fun to be had here as well. So this has really just been an account of what we know or suspect so far, but work on site is really only just beginning. Already there has been a wealth of interest in the mosaic from many different scholars, several of whom have started to share their theories about different details. And it certainly confirms my view that there are many possible interpretations. And the mosaic is going to provide food for thought for many years, possibly even prompting re-evaluation of other pavements in the light of the new discovery. I certainly believe that it's full of symbolism. I think all the figures are likely to represent named characters in the story, and every bit of detail probably has a meaning, and it may well provide many clues about the values and the preoccupations of the wealthy villa owner and other members of his class. But of course, as I've tried to emphasise all the way through this presentation, it's not just all about the mosaic. The finds and the soil samples will be analysed, will provide information on trade, activities and chronology at the villa. Careful study of the structures and deposits laid down on the site will give us insights into how the site was constructed, how it was used and how it fell into disrepair. You'll notice that I haven't drawn many parallels to other sites in this talk, because that work is really only just beginning. But comparison with many other sites will help us understand details that we've only just begun to discover. There are further plans to carry out field work this summer, but the research priorities, the scope and the details are still under discussion. However, any work that is undertaken is going to provide us with new information that may modify, support or explain our current interpretations. It's been extremely hard work with this site in many ways, but a huge privilege to be involved in the work so far and to have an opportunity to excavate on a really thrilling and unusual site, but the sort of site that when you think, yes, I'm going to be an archaeologist, it's the sort of site that you hope for, really. So it has been a wonderful experience, and in a way not just for the archaeology too, but for the chance to collaborate with and learn from a fantastic range of colleagues who have brought their various expertise to bear and continually offer new insights, and hopefully that process will continue going forward. And another aspect has just been how much other people have enjoyed this, sharing it so far with members of the public as we've been able to since it was released to the press. Then, it really has, I think, brought quite a lot of joy to a lot of people. And at this juncture, I think it is very important that I say thank you to the Archaeological and Historical Society, for the funds that you have granted us to contribute to the post-excavation effort. I do hope that I've convinced you of the huge amount that we're learning from this site and the great pleasure it's providing to people. So thank you very much for that, because it's very much appreciated. And finally, I'd just like to thank you for listening to me.